Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video I want to talk about the loot system, its issues and how it can be improved in the future. As always, if you like this video, sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. And here's a shout out to our amazing patrons for their support of the channel and the Armory. I will also be bringing back the Com Relay live show in the coming weeks, so watch for the announcements on YouTube and the Armory Discord. If you haven't heard of the Com Relay yet, it's a live show where I talk to my community about the current topics in Star Citizen. Now back to the video. The loot system has been around for about 2 years now, and besides a few changes to drop rates and box contents, not much has changed. Which actually highlights a few issues it has, and these are issues that likely need to be addressed before contested zones come into the game. Contested zones are a feature present in the Pyro system, where players get to fight in certain areas which contain various loot. There is also a token system that unlocks more valuable loot, but we don't know much about that yet. There actually was a whole ISC dedicated to the contested zones, but information on the token system was left out. The question is whether loot is enough incentive for players to take part in the activity. After all, combat, especially in Pyro, is a very high-risk activity. In the current state, the loot system is quite unreliable, and most of the time you won't find anything useful or anything you would want, and you can forget about trying to find the full set of armor in multiple boxes. Now, from a technical perspective, this happens because of how the loot system is built. There are too many possible options for each box, and not enough items are selected, which lowers the drop chance of anything to a fraction of a percent. But if you're trying to be realistic, this actually makes sense. In real life, if you go to an abandoned place, you're unlikely to find anything useful or valuable. On the other hand, if you go to a place that was recently occupied, you're more likely to find stuff. But this logic doesn't work out quite well for a game, especially if you consider that loot is one of the ways to make going places worthwhile. If not from a monetary perspective, then from a progression perspective. Abandoned outposts in Stanton have relics and other trinkets you can find. They are not valuable, but they are fun to look for. Bunkers can yield unique weapons and armor, but that's not engaging for a long time, especially if you find random pieces of armor that you won't use or that don't have value. So what's the solution? Well, there are actually quite a few things CIG could do to improve the loot system, and some are actually fairly easy to implement. They could either reduce the number of potential items in a box, or increase the number of items generated, or add more and larger loot containers. This would improve the drop rates for certain items and would give players more to choose from in each loot box. Now, adding more items into the box can be problematic with the new inventory changes coming in 3.24, especially in regards to box capacity. So they would have to introduce one SCU or larger loot boxes, which I think would be pretty cool. For example, imagine you raid a pirate bunker and at the end you steal their whole armory, which is just a 2 SCU box, but it's full of guns, ammo and armor. Sometime in the future, CIG could even make the armory crate visually distinctive, which would make it an interesting hangar flare. Next, CIG could add some universally useful loot. We already have this in the form of food, drinks, and medical supplies, which are useful but relatively low value. CIG could add some form of physicalized currency like credit chips. Physical currency seems like something that should actually be pretty useful in Pyro anyways, since presumably UE banking is not available. Adding money into the loot boxes would instantly add an item that everyone wants and likes to find. Now, of course, you could argue that you can take items you find and sell them for money. And you're right, but money is money. It has universal value without further steps, which is generally more valuable to a player. Which I guess is an unexpected lesson in the importance of liquidity. There is one more thing that CIG can do, but it requires a bit more effort. It would also be a more gamey approach to loot, but I don't think CIG should be afraid of that. CIG could add loot that's practically worthless, but can be traded for something valuable. It would essentially be a token system but for loot. For example, you would find some artifacts or broken machinery that you can bring to a specialized vendor, and that vendor will have some selection of items on offer that you can choose from depending on how many token items you brought them. This retains the looting gameplay but gives players more control over what they get. It's essentially adding another layer of abstraction over money, but at least it's something more interesting than selling random items you find. Now, there is one more thing that we know is coming and will majorly change how looting works, and that's crafting and blueprints. We know that we'll be able to craft pretty much any item, piece of furniture, component, or ship. And we also know that all blueprints will have multiple tiers, with the higher tiers having better stats but also requiring more expensive or rare materials. And of course, higher tier blueprints themselves will be pretty rare, so you could add these high tier items or their blueprints into various loot boxes to create different value levels, which would actually work very well for the epic type loot that's to be found after completing a contested zone. But that would actually bring back the issue of useless loot. But in theory, even if you don't want that specific high tier blueprint or item, there is a chance that someone else does. So you could trade it for money and use that to buy what you want. Or we could extend the vendor concept to blueprints, allowing you to trade in the blueprint you found for one that you actually want. Star Citizen is obviously a MMO, but only recently CIG started decisively moving the game in that direction. We see that with the increased frequency of dynamic events and with the planned increase in relying on the loot system. But this increased usage needs to be matched with updates and adjustments to make the system beneficial to the player. And with that being said, that's all for today. What do you think? How could CIG improve loot? Are tokens a valid solution? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, fly safe, and I will see you in the verse.